So, David, with all that in mind, like you've talked about the grit, what's the difference between like grit and resilience? And is it like we need to have one or the other, or are they both useful in life as we're going forward? We need to have a good grasp on both.
Yeah. I mean, I get pretty excited about this topic, so I'll try to distill the two definitions down rather quickly. Angela Duckworth wrote a book on grit, and I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but grit is just this idea of I'm going to do something difficult, over a long period of time, depending on what it is, because what's on the other side of the hill is worth fighting for, right? It's worth accomplishing, and so grit is doing difficult things for a specific reason, an intrinsically motivating reason, and resilience is just this idea of getting back up quickly, right? If someone is a resilient person, if they get knocked down, as it were, they get up quicker. And so, but here's where I think that identity and authenticity, in the kind of the mode that I'm referring to here, really shapes these two words in such a better light. So, and I'll use these words: intrinsic, right? The internal narrative, versus extrinsic, which is the applause of others, the approval of others, or shame, or, whatever those external forces are. So if you understand, grit and resilience, you're not doing hard things because you're embarrassed if you don't, right? Like to be somebody. You're not doing something difficult because you're just, are just desperate to finally accomplish something that someone would say is valid, or, whatever that is, or people please, or not be embarrassed or whatever. And resilience, it's kind of the same thing, really. It's, why am I getting up so quickly? Is it because I'm embarrassed? Is it because I can't give up, or I'm going to be a nobody, or, all this kind of thing? No. A person who is solid in their identity, if they fall in the mud, maybe very literally, they sit there for a second and laugh with everybody else. They're like, oh man, that was hilarious, right? They're not concerned about falling down, but of course they get up and they're like, oh, let's keep going here. But here's where I think that, and this is something that Dr. Andy actually introduced to me, is resilience is like a basketball. So you bounce the ball really hard on the ground, and it loses its form for, a split second. But then what happens? It bounces back to a predetermined, describable form, a circumference that has data. Well, that's kind of us, right? If you look at, who we are, we're not bouncing back to an oblong, obelisk, whatever type of a ball. We're bouncing back to that same who, the person that is describable. And also I'd say this, the person who's missional, right? If I'm experiencing setbacks, and I've had a bunch in the last few weeks, it's like, you know what? I can feel the emotion around that. I'm human. In fact, resilience and grit require hardship. They require consternation of your soul. They require, angst and anger and frustration and overwhelm. You can't have one without the other. And so I love this idea that, grit is doing something from an intrinsically motivating place, something difficult over a long period of time because it's worth fighting for. And you feel called. It's like a tether, being pulled forward, as opposed to this idea of, I don't want to look like an idiot. And then resilience, right? Just bouncing back quickly to a predetermined, describable essence of who you are and what your mission is. And so what we see, of course, and one of the reasons I'm passionate about this and I'm writing the book is, you have to be raised to that space. You can, to your question, can you do it after the fact? Of course, but it's a lot harder. So if your guardian, as it were, I'll just leave it at that term. If your guardian does not help you to establish, the circumference of that ball, right? The describable essence of who you are, values, virtues, convictions, goosebumps, the whole nine yards, you're going to have a big question mark inside of your own soul and mind. You're going to feel it. And that feeling just sucks. and you're gonna do whatever it takes to medicate that feeling. And by the way, everyone else around you is going to feel that question mark. They're going to experience your internal question mark. And those, and again, those are, we are mind, body, and spirit. You have to answer those questions about everything from eternity to love to justice to values, convictions, virtues. You've got to have some bedrock. Otherwise, you've got a moving target for one thing, but you have an internal. Well, how about this? This is something I think is really fascinating. Dr. Andy uses the term, with the coursework, he calls it true north versus a compass, right? A compass, you're going to get close, right? But a compass does what? It reads the magnetic field around it in order to try and establish north. Well, what does that look like in our lives, right? We're kind of reading the room, right? We're like you mentioned, being a chameleon. We're kind of just reading whoever's around us because I don't have the internal fortitude to be me. And if somebody mocks even the false version of me, I'm going to crumble. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to avoid pain or displeasure from those around me because I don't have any idea who I am. Well, true north is what? True north is a specific set of coordinates, a fixed point, an immovable point at that. And that's why I think it's, so for those of us who are, in the process of raising teenagers or, young kids for that matter, I can't stand it when a parent, has vagary around those bedrock issues. Well, I'm not going to tell my kids what to think. They need to decide these things for themselves. You know what that's code for? I have no idea what I believe. Everything is a moving target, and I've not placed I don't have the courage to make a truth claim about what I believe about everything from love to justice. That's what you call, I'll just speak for men, that's what you call cowardice. That's what you call pathetic. I'm kind of picking a fight here, right? If you can't look at your children and to say that these things are immovable, and I believe, and I'm willing to live and die for such things, you need to get your act together, answer questions, and decide what you believe, or you are doing your children a disservice that they're going to spend years in counseling and addiction trying to get over. And causing your children to rise means you're causing them to rise from something, right? A fixed point, a plumb line. C.S. Lewis says, that if someone calls anything crooked, well, there has to be a straight edge somewhere, right? You're comparing it to something. So that straight edge, again, you may not have it perfect, but don't be indifferent to your children. Don't be a coward. Surround yourself with people that can help you drill down on those things that are absolute foundational to a courageous, beautiful, successful life.
Yeah. And that kind of segues into a different question, David. So as far as my father setting the example of similar style to like what you've done, right? That wasn't there.
Right.
So then I'm trying to figure out who I am as one already, which is, hey, here's a hurdle. Do we ever get to a point where it's like, hey, it's too late for me. I didn't get this stuff, so I can't offer this stuff to my children. As far as kind of teaching them that, or is it almost like trying to build a plane in the air? You do the best you can with what you've got, but you're continuing to have that grit and perseverance to hey, I'm getting up. If I make a mistake and I change my beliefs because I'm still discovering who I am, there's that persistence there, but there's also the grit. It's like, this is a tall hill to climb.
Yeah.
Is it ever too late, or is that something that it's like, I guess, is there hope for guys like me that came from, the position of not having that as a gift from their father?
Man, such a great question. And what's funny, by the way, I kind of wanted to joke and just be like, nope, there's no hope.
Dude, it seemed like there wasn't at times, David. I'll be honest. It was like, holy crap, this is Everest.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm with you. And it's so I kind of wish my dad was actually sitting here with us today. I had a conversation with him yesterday, and I tell you what, dad would say this. He'll probably listen to this podcast, but he would say, man, my teens and 20s and 30s, I was just trying to figure it out. So here's some things though that I'm so grateful for my parents. I never, ever doubted that they loved me. And I'm talking like intense love. Like I was told every single day of my life, David, I love you. Like, looking into my eyes, grabbing me, kissing me. I mean, even when I'm a teenager, I love you, son. And, was there a lot of other stuff going on that was a little crazy? And absolutely, right there. And, they were trying to figure it out. And neither of them were raised, rather well. They were provided for, but they weren't given a paradigm, like we're talking about today to operate from. It was, be kind to everybody, don't be a jerk, and work really hard, and some other things there. That's a minimalist kind of a statement there. I've got great parents, but so to your point though, your story, right, is really common, sadly.
Way too common.
Look at the literally broken homes, brokenness that happens when people are not raised. Period. It's not to say that you can't be raised and still make poor choices, but boy, it's really hard to stay off track, when you've been loved and given a bedrock to launch from. So, is it too late? Of course not. And here's what I think is really wonderful. My friend Carter Crenshaw, he said the job, he said it this way. The first job of a father is protector. The second job is first one to say, I'm sorry. The first repenter, the first one that says, you know what? I didn't really handle that very well, or I'm not sure what the heck I'm doing, but I want you to know I love you. So I think that, this idea of doing justly, loving mercy, and walking humbly, right? Those three things that are required of us is a father. Even in my case, I feel like I'm rather well equipped, to be a great dad. My parents laid a pretty good foundation. I kind of stood on their shoulders and ran with it, and been very fortunate to be surrounded by some really wonderful people to help me. And, but I think that, the key really is humility, because I'm going to blow it. And I do all the time. I'll be honest. I think I'm a really great dad. And I hope my kids would say that. But guess what? I can be a total ding dong sometimes and be a selfish jerk and angry and, kind of the grumpy old dad thing. But I think that, love, covers a multitude of sins, right? So for dads to show up, literally just show up and to say, here is my intention, my noble intent is to give you bedrock, is to start talking about this stuff, is to see the beauty and the courage and the, all of the wonderful characteristics that make you, and to start naming them and calling them out. But guess what? I don't really know how to do it. And it's a little awkward because nobody taught me how, and it can feel a little bit funny, but I want you to know that I'm going to try, and I'm never going to give up. And if I screw up, I'm going to be the first one to say, I'm sorry. So here's what's really neat though. And, we live in a time, and again, this is kind of my mission here, right? I'm creating an online community for guardians to jump on board to learn how to do this. This is my entire mission in life. And, it looks like what? It looks like a guardian establishing these things for themselves first, right? Because you cannot give away something you don't have. So it's understanding, well, who the heck am I? What is it that lights me up? What are my core values? What are my, like the top 5 maybe, or like what are these things that I'm going to hold up in front of me to make decisions through the matrix, my decision-making matrix? What is it that, what are my strengths and how do I want to apply those things? All that stuff. And then when you've established that for yourself, you can, go look at your kids and be like, hey, what is it that makes you cry? What is it that puts that lump in your throat? What is it that makes you furious? Like what, if somebody, is it somebody being bullied? Is it someone not living up to their potential? I mean, it could be all kinds of things, right? So that you can establish the bedrock for yourself and then guide someone into that space. That's what causing someone to rise means. It's a, you can't give away something you don't have. So my mission in life is to help people establish their own bedrock, their own who, their own what, their own why, maybe the how, we'll see if we can get there. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of the how actually, but is there hope for people? Yes. And you can literally, I'm talking 90 days or 6 months, change the entire trajectory of your life and that of your children.
Yeah, that's the powerful thing. It's not only accessible from like our dad.
Yeah.
I mean, till the day he passed, that was not something that I got from him. And I don't know he was in a place to give. Yeah. But that's where we're in a community of men.
Yeah.
There's that opportunity to learn from that. And it pays dividends because, it's like our children, until they're 18, there's a certain amount of, hey, you're under my roof. You've got some control's not the right word, but you've got some direction, right?
Well, and I'll be honest, I like the word control. I mean, I really do. And the reason is this, it's not to be a jerk.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm the man of my home, right, I'm taking absolute and utter responsibility as to what happens inside of those walls. How about this? My kingdom, with a little K, right? If I'm in the room, I don't care if I'm at the grocery store, or wherever I'm at. I'll be honest, I take the approach of this is my kingdom. My kingdom is whatever I can see, taste, touch, whatever I can influence, whatever's under my purview in the moment is my kingdom. And if there's something that's happening inside of that kingdom, right? If somebody's getting robbed at a gas station or whatever it is, or, some dude slaps his wife, guess who's getting involved? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if I don't know them. My kingdom is what I can see. So if my children, Dr. Andy said, by the way, he said the number one job of a father is to remove as much uncertainty as possible. Mm. And so I'm going to control laughter. I want us to laugh a lot, right? If you want to look at it like that, I'm going to control hugs because I'm going to be the chief hug giver. And we're going to pray together. We're going to say, I'm sorry. We're going to go on some vacations, right? We're going to chop wood and haul branches and work hard around the farm here. And so I just feel like this idea of taking absolute responsibility for what happens inside of my kingdom is the job of every man. And that might sound over the top, but here, I'll say it this way, Mike, how do we know that's true? Like, how do we know that that's a good thing? Have you ever heard a child or a woman for that matter say, boy, I sure wish my husband didn't lead so well. Gee, I wish my husband didn't, tell us he loved us a lot and, showed my kids how to work really hard and tuck them into bed at night. I sure wish that he wasn't so present and so intentional. No, you will never hear that out of any child or wife for that matter, unless they're insane. Because when men show up with courage and kindness and virtue and, leadership, everybody wins. And when men don't, everybody loses. So, by the way, I want to back up for a moment. For you, how do you heal? So you can't, by the way, Mike, if you were to go through my course, right? You can't 100% establish that identity. You can't 100% establish authenticity. That's a portion of it. But those things are incomplete without relationship. We are made for relationship. The entire point of life, is relationships, period. The rest of it, I think, is just a context, right? I mean, and the context is good and needs to happen. But the entire point is relationship. And we are, our sense of ourselves and everybody else, is discovered by, yes, answering great questions, but it's enriched and galvanized by someone else, i.e. a friend, who, quote unquote, this is John Eldredge, by the way, who wrote the book Wild at Heart. Mm-hmm. He says, we can father one another. Well, that's kind of a weird thing to say. It seems a little bit sticky, right? But what does that mean? That means hanging out with men who are awesome, right? Men who don't shy away from conversations about, everything from your own heart to spiritual things. Men who would be willing to look at you, right? And to say, hey, Mike, yesterday when you walked into the room and you said these things, or when you sent this message or whatever, I could tell that you were drawing from a deeper well there. And that took courage to say that or do that. By the way, that was freaking awesome. Right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what a father and a mother, for that matter, right, needs to say to their kids. But we change and grow, right? The water to cause anything to grow is what? It's love.
Yeah.
And love isn't, I love you and, nice shirt. Love is, it's holy. It's Holy, and it's WHOLLY, other, holy other. It is, I believe, right? We could say it's a currency. It's a current. I believe it's a person, but it changes us from the inside out.
Right.
We tend, when someone says something to that deepest place in us, when they're making eye contact and you can tell they're like, hey man, I see you. And what I see is awesome. Well, guess what happens? We start to melt inside, and the places that are wounded or scared, they start to kind of melt away. And the truer and truest version of ourself, of who we are, starts to rise.
Yeah. You well up in a place of, where it's been like a desert. I guess it's almost like an oasis or an Engedi. It's water to a place that's been dry and desolate. Yeah. I do want to jump back, and maybe control's the right word for it, but it's like when our children are under the age of 18, there's a certain amount of bumpers in place, I guess, where your kids will be around, right? But once they turn 18, man, if you have not instilled and caused them to rise up like you're talking about, I know when I got to 18, man, it was like goodbye, and I was gone and off.
Yeah, yeah.
So when they're in those, those years, before 18, it's important to, help them, to guide them, to let them see where we're at and how we're growing. But it's not the only time that's open to letting them see you walk that out and learn and grow alongside of them. So it's much easier when they're younger, but it's not like hey, this is the only window you have.
Right.
So
no, absolutely not. And it's funny. There's a scripture that says, train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart. What does that look like, right? Sometimes, you get kids that, it's hormones and everything else just going absolutely bananas, when they get out of high school, and they go off the rails. And, a lot of parents are like, what the heck did I do wrong? Well, truth of the matter is I can't tie a nice bow on that. But at the same time, it's almost like, the word, grit, it requires obstacles. You can't, it's like salty and sweet. So when someone is, going bananas and doing stupid stuff and, causing chaos and so on, here's a weird thing. This is a mystery here, but it's almost like love, right? Means more than, right? It's like, it goes back to Les Mis. It's when someone doesn't deserve it. In fact, when they deserve, punishment, love actually holds more weight. And that's putting it lightly. It's like it becomes something that is just absolutely just wrecks our pride.
Yeah.
And so I feel like is it sad to see some people go off the rails and do stupid stuff and make a mess? Yeah. And hopefully they don't take it too far. And, at the same time, I've seen so many stories, granted, I've kind of stayed in the middle of the road most of my life, thank goodness. But I've seen so many stories of, people causing a huge mess. But then when they come back, as it were, right, they come back to love, their lives look even more powerful. It's the theme we often see, that something is better for having been broken. It's like muscles, right? You tear it down, you break it, and it comes back better. It's like when, you got a relationship that has been struggling and finally someone says, "Hey man, I blew it. I'm really sorry. Would you forgive me?" Guess what? That friendship becomes something that it could have never been without that brokenness. So, this topic, these concepts, they're complex. And they're messy and convoluted, and sometimes they're, we can't tie a nice bow on it. But at the same time, I think that the more we sit in the mystery, the more we see, through the window a bit more clearly, as to what's happening and what's possible.
Yeah, almost like you're talking about when the father says, "Hey, you actually forgot this silver." It's almost like this may be a little too nerdy or sci-fi, but it's almost like a tractor beam out of like Star Trek, right? Just drawing you in and closer.
Yeah.
I did want to touch on one thing that you had mentioned earlier, and then also talk about the think better instead of bigger before we close out here.
Sure.
So you had talked about when you were doing the concert with your daughter, and there's the NDA, almost like you're glad you can't share it. Like what's the logic or the reason behind that puts you to say that?
Yeah, because I in the past, of course, I would want to proclaim it from the rooftops, that, hey, I got to stand with the governor, I got to stand with, whoever it was, right? And because I just wanted, I wanted the attaboy, I wanted the applause of other people. Here's what's weird, like the place that we, I've gotten to sing actually 4 times now. I would rather sing, there than the White House. Like, growing up, thinking about what's possible in my wildest dreams, never thought that, that was even on the radar. Like I would have never even put it in the possibilities. So what's really fascinating is to, in some ways, right, be forced to not say anything. It reinforces that I don't need, the applause of others. And that applause is never enough. And it's 99% of people that I don't even know that well. Not that I don't appreciate if I do something great and everybody says, "Hey, great job." That's always a nice thing. It's not that we should minimize that. I just don't want to make a good thing an ultimate thing, because we get those things disordered and then they start crushing us. And so, yeah, I just think it's a healthy thing to be like, wow, it's a good reminder. That's why I framed it. Is just to be, no, I don't need that. I know who I am. I know whose I am. And I want to have a really great impact on people around me with no stupid strings attached.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're able to enjoy the experience, not focus on what is everybody else thinking.
Yeah.
Instead, you're able to be present in the situation with your daughter. Yeah. So that makes absolute sense. So you had talked about think better, not bigger. What does that mean? And like, what's the power behind it? What kind of impact is it going to make in my life to think better instead of, thinking bigger?
Yeah, man. There's so many ways to look at this. So, well, who is it that defines bigger? Who is it that defines better? You know what I mean? It's like in our culture, and again, that could be everything from your family to, stuff we see on TV or the internet or whatever. People are telling you, as it were, what you're missing out on if you don't do this, or who you could be if you accomplish this, or, if you don't do this, you're going to be a loser or whatever it is. So what's fascinating is again, when you go back to the true north plumb line, right? When you understand who you are, all of a sudden, better starts looking more sweeter, right? It looks more calming. It looks more methodical. It looks more orderly. It looks clearer. It looks, it feels right. Follow the clues. Whereas quite often better or bigger looks like a bunch of stress and anxiety and overwhelm. And, I don't know how to do that or get there or whatever that looks like. And so I think that identity, identifying authorship, right? Well, then whatever you choose, whatever you want to describe as better or bigger, right? That's you. Not that we can't do big things, by the way. I don't want anybody to hear me saying that, going to Mars or swinging for the fence or something is, a bad thing, right? But boy, if you start doing a bigger thing, because you feel like you're a nobody, and if you accomplish that big thing, well, guess what? That's never going to satisfy you. Look at in the past, whether it was Elvis Presley or Michael Jackson or, everybody else, like they had absolutely everything and it crumbled them. What we do or what we accomplish is just the icing on the cake. It's an outcropping, or should be an outcropping, of our identity and what we love.
So it's kind of like when we believe that we need to think bigger, that's kind of flowing from that whole deficit of knowing who, and like what we talked about, the who and why. It's flowing out of that deficit, and it's the next almost fix, I guess, right? Kind of same thing.
It can be. That's the thing. That's where everybody has to make that assessment for themselves. So what I think is neat is, again, when you get back to the identity and authenticity, you tend to have self-trust, right? You're, again, I view that as more of a top-down spiritual paradigm, as a Christian, but it's, because I believe those things have been instilled in me, right? I didn't create me. So I'm actually riding the sunbeam to the sun and honoring what I believe has been created in all of us, right? And being like, man, you've been created marvelously. You quit trying so hard. You're enough. Just relax. You can exhale here. You don't have to be, generating anything or, creating something or whatever that is, and you're more than enough. And that's something that, it takes a while to understand that. And it's hard, especially in a world where you've got 9,000 opinions being, shot at you every day.
Yeah. You got to know you, not the person that's kind of putting out the image.
Yeah.
Because we're all unique, and we're all going to be having different values and virtues and just ideas of what we want to be and what we want to do. And as many people as there are.
Here's something that's fascinating. Mm-hmm. I think, and I've never really, I'm actually going to process this out loud. I've never really even said this, but I just kind of thought of it on the fly. What would be the better scenario here? If someone you admire, you've never met, right? So you've got a hero on TV or whatever it is. What would be the better scenario here? If they walk into the room and they start asking you about your goals, oh man, where do you want to be in 10 years? What are your goals? All this stuff about doing, so you have to feel like you got to come up with some stuff that seems impressive for this person that you hold on a pedestal, right? Because we really ultimately, we're kind of looking for I think it's Tim Keller that says we're looking for the admiration of the admirable. Well, to me, that's God, right? I have his admiration and his smile. But in human form, like we've got heroes all over the place. So again, to paint the picture, what's the more wonderful scenario here is if the person you admire walks in and they're wearing their fancy suit and everything, and you're sitting in a chair across from them and they've got their Rolex on and whatever it is. And they're like, hey man, where do you want to be in 5 years? What are your goals? What have you been doing the last 5 years? What's your routine in the morning? Okay, they start asking you stuff like that. Or, right, they show up wearing jeans and a t-shirt and, some silly looking old tennis shoes they just mowed the lawn in, and they sit down and they kick back in their chair, and they smile. Now, what's your name? Man, what a joy to be with you today. What is it? What have you been doing lately? Oh, tell me about that. Oh man, that makes me think of a story. I remember when my dad took us over here and we did this, and then they start wading into the weeds of, well, what do you do when you're not working? What is it that lights you up? Man, what's your favorite movie? They start looking for clues as to, what is it that's really true about this person's nature. And they want to discover this idea of, the human being as opposed to a human doing. And I think that, I think everybody can relate to that. It's like, man, the person that I admire wants to get to know me, and they're not even asking me any questions that I might be tempted to say something and how to impress them. Are you kidding? That's how you love somebody. It's a funny thing. I mean, nobody knows who I am musically. I've been fortunate to stand on some really fun stages and this and that, and I've signed some autographs for that matter because people in the moment thought I was famous. And it's been so fun to honestly to have a position like that once in a while, because I can walk into a high school, choir auditorium and speak to a group of people and just sit down and be one of them, right? And they're thinking, man, you got to sing with the symphony and you got to do I'm like, yeah, but let me tell you, and I get to ask them questions about them and what lights them up and, what do you do for fun? And, just be real.
Yeah. There's definitely a difference in somebody wanting to know you and know about you rather than just, I think it's almost like a common question or an icebreaker kind of question, right?
Sure.
Something different that's personal will definitely make more of an impact and draw you in. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me, man. How can men connect with you outside of the podcast here?
Yeah, so I'm hoping by July, we're going to have a website up, ofcourseim.com. You can visit davidask.com. If you need a thermostat guard, you can go to statguardplus.com, of course. But I like to end my interviews like this how about this? I like to end my conversations like this. And by the way, I really appreciate the conversational, side to this, that we had a great discussion, is let me know if I can do anything for you. I don't care what it is, and I will do my best.
Well, I appreciate it. And the book is going to be out, you said in July is what you're looking at, right?
I'm hoping. Yeah, it might be a bit later, but we're shooting for the end of July.
Cool. Well, we will be sure to have the URLs inside of the show notes, man. David, I appreciate you talking about grit, reliance, our identity, getting,
Thanks.
Our who, not the why, as our foundation first, and the value and importance of that. And then helping us to, think better, not bigger. Man, David, I really appreciate it. Thank you, my friend.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.